Welcome to everyone who is joining us this evening on Facebook and YouTube for the last of the 3 Discover online webinars. My name is Ruth. If you're on Facebook, please make sure to like our page so that you can keep up to date with all the latest news. And if you're on YouTube, subscribe to our channel and also click on the little bell icon so that you get a notification every time we post a new video. We hear so many amazing stories about people's lives, communities and churches being transformed as they get to know Jesus through the Bible in their own language. And we have 2 people tonight with first-hand experience of some of those stories. We have Lund and David Rowbory serving in different types of roles in Southern Africa and Nigeria. We'll be hearing from them in just a moment, and you can ask questions through Facebook and YouTube, which we'll try to answer during the second half of the webinar. So please start asking those questions, just put them in the comments below the Facebook video or the YouTube video. We hope that you'll find this evening really interesting, but more than that, we hope that it encourages you as you see something of what God is doing around the world through Bible translation, and it inspires you to get involved with this work. If you've been following us for any length of time, you'll know that 1 in 5 people around the world don't have the Bible in the language that they understand best. That works out of 1.5 billion people. And we really believe that that is not right. That is a matter of justice. Everyone should have the chance to explore the claims of Christianity and get to know Jesus for themselves. That's why we're passionate about Bible translation. And so I'd now like to hand over to Ian and David as they talk together about their involvement with Wycliffe and what they've seen God do through the work of Bible translation. So I'd like to invite Ian and David onto the screen, please. Guys, if you'd like to take it away and have your conversation, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. Hi, David.
Hi.
Yeah. I'm doing well. As Ruth said, I think we've been pulled together because we do different things and we got here through different routes as well. And so, yeah, let's see where we go in the conversation. But probably it's a good thing just to see if there's anything we are similar about. What's your family situation like?
I've got 4 lovely girls. They are aged from 4, Helen, who's 4, up to Rebecca, who's 11. So they are at home at the moment doing some homeschool, which is what we normally do in Nigeria, but we're in the UK at the moment. What about you?
Good. Yeah, well, there is a commonality. We've got 4 children as well, but ours are adult children in their 30s and 40s. And I'm married to Cheryl, and we've been married, I've got to be careful I've got this right, 46 years. She's downstairs, so if I've got it wrong, I might hear somebody shouting at me.
Of course, so, I should have mentioned I'm married to Julie. Yes. Been married for 14 years. In Nigeria, as we say, I'm married to 1 wife.
Yes.
Sometimes have to specify that.
Yes, I understand that. Good. So, yeah, I think we did come to this via different routes. And so perhaps if I share how we got to be working with Wycliffe, and then you could tell your story.
Yeah. How did you?
I mean, most of my life I've worked for a commercial organisation, and I was privileged to have lots of different roles in that organisation, and I really enjoyed my time working there. And then in my early 50s, I joined our church staff team, where I'd been part of the leadership team for a while. And in that role, I sort of was on the other side of the fence, because part of what I did was to work with people who were exploring mission and to help sort of test their call and to help them with finances and all those sorts of things to prepare somebody to go. So that was quite interesting when I jumped the fence. But what we did was we had somebody in our church who worked in Mozambique for Wycliffe. And we had a thought that when we retired, we might go and sort of help them while they got on with doing the clever stuff. And it didn't quite work out like that, but we took a mission trip from our church to Mozambique, and we went on another visit, and we felt that that was a place we could go and work for a couple of years. So we then went to Wycliffe and said, could we join your short-term program and go to Mozambique and work? And very graciously they said yes, and so we went out to Mozambique. But it was actually through somebody in church, a connection.
Yeah.
Was it similar for you?
It was similar in some ways. It was coming out of university. I studied computer science. I'd had a couple of years in Uganda when I was a child, and then during my time at university, ended up leading a small team for a 2-month short-term summer trip to Uganda again. And so I dipped my toe in the water a wee bit, and around the time that I was graduating, it was around just before the dot-com boom and bust, and I got offered a job, and I suddenly thought, wow, I actually do want to try and do something useful for a bit before I get sucked into the rat race. So I was thinking about it the other way around. I thought I'll get over this, probably just spend maybe a year doing something useful, and chatted to some friends, and realized that I could go and do really boring IT stuff, getting rid of viruses and that sort of thing, which wouldn't necessarily take me anywhere. Or a friend put me in touch with Wycliffe and pointed out they had a rather well-developed graduate program that gave you skills and got you doing something quite useful. And that was a good way of Wycliffe sort of testing us out and also letting us see whether this might be something that we do longer term. I really didn't expect to do it longer term. And one of the things that I quite liked about this program was that you got a clear task to do. So I worked on a dictionary in the northwest of Nigeria, along with another guy. But it was while I was doing that I suddenly realized that even though education had sort of spread all out throughout Nigeria, there's a real need for Bible translation. I thought, well, I don't feel that great at languages really, but there's just such an opportunity here, and I didn't know how long the window of opportunity would last, really. So I kind of got sucked in, but it all started just with a sort of short-term thing, do a dictionary, and then my plan was to get on with other stuff. So you knew a little bit about the situation in Mozambique. What was it that sort of drew you to that?
That's an interesting question, really, because it's hard to put your finger on it. I think we went out for a trip to a conference there, and as part of that, there was a prayer afternoon where we were on a centre and people had created a prayer walk around the centre. And so my wife Cheryl and I, we were going around, and ideally we were looking for writing in the sky, or at least on a wall that said, "This is the place, please come." And it wasn't quite like that. And I think in the end we came to the point where we could see potentially there was things we could contribute to because of our experience and what we'd been through, and just life. And so we sort of came to the point of saying, why not? Rather than, is this the place? So that was what drew us there. And then exploring it with Wycliffe helped us to firm things up and to really move forward in going there.
So you did a wee bit of training with Wycliffe before you went out, did you?
No, because we were only going as short-termers. We had to, we need to keep this quiet. Okay, David.
I won't tell anyone if you don't.
Thanks. We came as short-termers. And so the process for doing short-term is not quite as intense as coming in a full term. But to be fair, halfway through our time in Mozambique, the director went on home assignment, and I was asked to cover for him while he was away. We just felt that actually this might go somewhere else as well. And so we then became proper members of Wycliffe, and we're in October about to start our 9th year of a 2-year short-term program.
Oh, that's pretty good.
So
yes,
but yeah, so what role are you doing now?
I'm a Bible translation consultant, still just about in training in Nigeria, in the sort of north center of Nigeria. Been there for just over 9 years, since 2011. So our girls have really grown up in Nigeria, and I guess I got a taste for what it would be like being a Bible translation consultant in 2001 when I did my short-term year. And I could see that there were lots of people interested in translating the Bible, but what we really needed was training and quality control for those enthusiastic translators. I guess I've realized later on that there may have been some assumptions that I was making about how well translators would be understanding the English and how well equipped they'd be. So I realized all the more how important it is for translators to be well trained now. Some of my training is with teams like the Asher team from 3 hours drive away from Jos, where we're doing training on the job. And then I've been teaching at a couple of seminaries as well, which is a bit more academic training. Because I'm a computer person, I got typecast as the person to do all the computer training, which is actually a bit rubbish because I've been playing about with computers since I was 9 years old, and many of these guys who come, I've only just encountered a computer a year or two ago. So I'm really the wrong person to be empathizing with them, but I've been trying to do my best.
Yeah. It's interesting you talking about understanding of English and things. One of the things that I guess you hear as well, but we hear reasonably regularly when there's been a Bible translated or a New Testament translated and it's published and people get it, they tend to use words like, now this is in my language, I know God speaks to me, he speaks my language. And I think it's hard sometimes for us to understand the power of having something in your own language when we've grown up with the Bible, or many versions of the Bible in our own language. It's such a powerful thing for them, isn't it?
It is. I think I sometimes get a sense of that when I go out to an outlying village. Just before we left Nigeria last summer, I went out with my daughter Elizabeth. And we were at a church where they were having an entire service in the local language, which doesn't sound that remarkable, but actually it was maybe only the 4th or 5th service like that ever to have happened. And I realized that actually I wasn't following too much of it at all. If they'd been using Hausa, which is the language of wider communication or wilder confusion, I might have had some idea what was going on, and certainly Elizabeth, beside me, age 9, might have been able to pick up a few things because Hausa and English are mixed in the church that we normally go to. But so this experience was letting us feel a little bit what it's like for people just normally of hearing just a wall of words and struggling to figure out what is going on. And yet at the same time as we're having this sort of, oh, I don't know what is going on experience, the people in the church are being surprised at hearing all of these words in everyday language. And people who felt sort of excluded because, you know, their Hausa is a bit rubbish, or if it's in English, they dropped out of school early. Those people are suddenly realizing, actually, this is a real thing. This isn't just some fancy show for city people, but this is a real thing in real everyday language. And they're starting to take it more seriously. And so that's quite interesting for me going and having this sort of, oh, I don't know what's going on kind of experience. and at the same time seeing, oh wow, this is really meaningful to the people. That's encouraging.
Yeah. You see, this is where there is a difference, because you're in the technical area of Bible translation. I deal with administration and all that side of things. And I think when we first went out, I was a little naive about some things. You know, I didn't understand translation at all. I thought it was as easy as somebody learning French and just, you know, just speaking in French and you just wrote it down. I didn't understand the complexity. I do now. But
I think actually many translators really don't know what they're getting themselves into.
No.
Actually, they think, oh, how hard can this be? And yeah, some of us technical people have the job of saying, oh, it's actually a lot harder than you think, but a lot more worthwhile. So
my wife does the same as you. She's a translation consultant, so I do know now.
You know now, yes, the agonies.
Yes, one of the things that I really found it really interesting by being in a country like Mozambique, which is sort of closer, not close, but closer to, say, a biblical landscape in terms of village life and the sophistication, was just experiencing some things that made me think about the Bible in a different way. So I learned a lot by going and helping. One of the things that I experienced was we have the story of the prodigal son, and off he goes, and he spends all his money, and he comes to the point where he has nothing and he's eating the food the pigs eat. And we had a foreman on the centre, and he had some pigs, and because I had a vehicle, I was asked to go to the rice mill with him to collect bags of what turned out to be husks of the rice. And when I read the story in the UK, I sort of had this, it's a very stupid view that actually it would be potato peelings and a few carrot peelings and maybe some cabbage that was there and maybe a bit of meat, and it wouldn't be pleasant, but it was something recognizable. What he fed to the pigs was sawdust.
Yes.
And you just think, this brought it to life to me in a different way, that by seeing how that culture worked and relating the Bible better to me, it was just really fascinating.
It's funny you should mention that, because I had an experience when I was checking one team's translation of that very passage of the parable of the two sons in Luke 15, and I was surprised actually when I was looking up all of the Greek words to make sure that we were translating it well. Even though the translators didn't know Greek, I was making sure that we were representing the Greek well. And this word for bean pods popped up, and it turned out to be a very specific word, not just a general kind of word that I've been expecting. How do we look? Found a picture in a dictionary and thought, I know this. Just outside my office where we were working, there was a tree which had these bean pods on this same kind of tree, and so we got together and looked at the picture, and I asked the translators, do you know this? Oh yes, it's this kind of thing. And they knew the name of it in their language and also in Hausa language. And we went outside and had a wee look, and that was quite striking, because when I asked a little bit more about it, what's the significance of this middle-class boy who's wanted everything and finds himself at rock bottom? What's the significance of him wanting to fill himself with these? Well, these were the kind of bean pods that only the poorest of people would eat. Again, as you're saying, just like the chaff. And so it has a cultural resonance. And actually, when we were able to recognize that something that looked general or vague or foreign was actually something very recognizable in their culture, not in British culture, because we don't have that kind of tree growing, then we were able to translate it in a way that actually conveyed more accurately than the English translations could possibly convey the depths that the younger son had fallen to, that he'd gone from riches and he'd squandered it all. and that just sets the stage really for a magnificent reconciliation.
Good.
We've some questions coming in.
Yeah. I'm going to answer one of the easy ones, and I'll throw a difficult one to you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Just one out of the way. Somebody had asked if we knew each other before this conversation. Well, and we did a bit of a technical test earlier in the week, but that was the first time we met. So we'd never met anybody ourselves. We'd never met each other physically before.
Turns out we have a few friends in common. That,
we do, yes,
along the way, but
they may be listening, so we won't mention them.
Yes, don't mention Serge.
But that was an easy one. Just to give you some thinking time, there's one about how Bible translators are trained when maybe literacy levels are low.
Oh, goodness, yes.
While you're thinking about that, and somebody's also asked about how work's been affected really by COVID-19, and people are assuming we're both in the UK. If I sort of try to answer that, I think yes, it's been a really quite difficult time for people across the world, and some people have had to come back. I am based in the UK, so it didn't make difference to me, but people have had to come back from some situations. I think what it has done as well, like in a number of different areas, it's made people think about how they do the work and if there's different ways of doing it. And so for people that are working with translation teams, where normally they would have gone to be with the team, or the team would have come to be with them, we're looking at different ways of doing it, using Zoom and other sort of electronic ways of doing remote consulting and remote work. It's not necessarily as effective, but it keeps the momentum going on Bible translation. So it has had a negative effect, but we are seeing some positives coming out by using different technology.
I'm in the UK because we were on the verge of going back to Nigeria after a home assignment in the UK when the lockdown came out, and Nigeria is a bit behind the UK in terms of the spread of coronavirus, but it's gradually spreading. So I just got to the stage where I'd been working with the translators a little bit to try and keep the momentum up even while I was out of the country, and I was only working really because they could come into our office in Nigeria and get a wee bit of help and get decent network access. And since all of Nigeria has been on lockdown, they've been just in their own places with very limited internet access. And so actually even the remote work that we had been doing and struggling through and managing quite well, we're not able at the moment. So I'm trying to figure out what we can do, because the translators work best as a team, not just individually. Individually, you can try doing a sort of formulaic word for word translation, but that's rubbish, and that's not what we're trying to do. So as a challenge, really, we could do with prayer for figuring out how we maintain some kind of work so they don't get too discouraged. That links in maybe to that question you're asking me about, maybe
training
how
the translators.
Yes, how are they trained when literacy levels are low, and the language, say most of the languages in Nigeria that we're working on have not been written down before the Bible translation project starts. So if people have any literacy, they're literate in a language which isn't their mother tongue, that isn't their strongest language. In Nigeria, probably people have often 3 languages that they speak. They'll have picked up Hausa from interacting with other people from other communities nearby, and English at school. English is not a fun language to teach you basic literacy, really. It would be much better if we could start with local languages, but we're having to pioneer that. You know, when I was working on the dictionary in the Chilela language in northwest Nigeria, I always wanted to be able to look up a dictionary, but I was making the dictionary, so I couldn't look it up. So in the same way, we're trying to pioneer some literacy as we do the Bible translation And why should anyone learn to read and write in their mother tongue anyway? There isn't anything to read and write until we get the Bible translated. And so actually what we're trying to figure out how the language works, using just helping the mother tongue speakers figure that out. They've been speaking it all their life, but they don't necessarily know consciously how it works. And then trying to figure out a consistent way of writing it, which is always a lot harder than people expect. And so it can be discouraging. But then I think we'll first release audio versions of the scriptures to people, because literacy is just otherwise a bit of a barrier. But we've been putting trial editions on phones, where you can see the written form and hear it being read. And people like that. It's very immediate.
The other thing is, in some cultures, there's a strong storytelling. And so another way of getting scripture out to people quickly, which we're seeing a little bit more of now, I think, is by producing 50, 60 Bible stories that take right the way through almost from Genesis to Revelation, and then training people to deliver those stories into communities. And then and audio again is becoming a big thing. One of the other questions was, it seems like the next 15 to 20 years are going to be exciting for Bible translation. How do you see it? I think David might have some things as well, but I think I do see it as it's an exciting time at the moment. I think there's a number of organizations that are involved in Bible translation, and there's a huge amount of cooperation and commonality in purpose in wanting to get scripture into communities, to enable people to just understand better God's love for them, and just all the things we take for granted. And I think in many ways the pace is increasing. There's still lots of languages that don't have anything, and certainly not enough languages that have a New Testament or even a complete Bible. So there's lots of people needed.
And I think there's sometimes a bit of a snowball effect. So I know in Nigeria, over the last 20 or 30 years, there's been quite a lot of effort persuading pastors and people in communities that Bible translation is possible and desirable. And so I was thinking about this as I watched Andrew Chard's interview last week. People were asking, how do you decide where to start? Well, actually in Nigeria, we're dealing with the issue of people coming and banging down our door saying, please, can you come and help us? Help us technically, sometimes also financially, but just we don't know what to do. We know we'd like to do this. It's great when people come early with those kind of, rather than saying, well, I've just done this translation, could you print it? Because that's awkward, because it's usually misguided and difficult. But yeah, it's very exciting, and we feel kind of overwhelmed. It's what drew me into going back to work in Nigeria, because I could just see there was just several lifetimes worth of work to be done in Nigeria. So it's an all hands on deck.
In Southern Africa, where I work, we're sort of responsible for 17 countries of 180 million people, and potentially 120 languages that need some translation work. It's a huge job. Nigeria's got about 300.
Yes. But anyway.
Nigeria's a big place.
An immense number,
Still plenty to do. There's an interesting question here, is about, are we seeing songs being written to people's first languages as a result of the Bible being more readily available? We're certainly seeing that.
What have you seen?
There's some projects we're working with in Angola where that's exactly what's happening. So we've got some people working with stories, and people consulting those, and then somebody is going along as well, who specialism in what's called ethno arts, and he's helping them to write songs and to write worship songs that they can use in church from the scriptures and the stories that have been translated, and helping them to do that so that they can do that themselves.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that I've seen in Nigeria is that as an outsider, when you go to churches, you might think, you know, all of the songs and everything are being done in a very local style. Actually, stay there a bit longer and you realize that often it's just been done in some kind of Nigerian or vaguely African style, but not really tapping into the resources of the local culture. And so it's a bit bland, really, because people have thought that their culture is somehow sub-Christian, and you couldn't use these. Well, you know, I'm a Scot, despite the accent, but you know, I love going to a ceilidh, and I love ceilidh music, and that somehow taps into something strong for me. And so I love it when there are Christian songs to good traditional Scottish foot tapping rhythms. And it's been eye-opening, I think, for people in Nigeria sometimes to realize that they can redeem these parts of their culture, and as they encounter the Bible translated to local language, that gives them inspiration to write impressive songs. I heard about that kind of thing happening in Sudan as well, because I studied in Kenya and had a Sudanese fellow student friend who told me that he was born about the same time that the Old Testament was born in his people group. And 10 years later, there was an explosion of really good songwriting based on the Psalms. So it takes a while. It's exciting, actually.
Very, David, we've got our last question. Yes. Which one shall we pick? Let's pick one, because some of them might take a long time. I'm really sorry we can't answer all the questions. There's a lot come in. One of the ones was about the fact that I said we'd come into Wycliffe through a short-term program, and did we recommend that? And I think the answer from our experience has to be yes. And experience I've seen with other people, because it does give you a very real experience of what being part of the mission organization and life in another country is like. And it can totally confirm that this is what you want to do for a longer period of time, which sort of happened for you. Or it can tell you that it actually, you know, that was great, but it's not what I want to do. And so that both of those outcomes are good. And we're all involved in missions. So whether it's overseas or at home or working in a bank or working on the mission field, we're all in mission. It's just different places and doing different things for God.
Yes, and we've seen some short-termers in Nigeria as well come along, get a little bit involved. And that's been quite eye-opening, I think, for some of them as well, because Nigeria is a country, well, it's like lots of countries in one, and it's easy for city-based, city-born and bred people to think, oh, everyone speaks English here, or everyone speaks Hausa here, or what need is there for Bible translation? And so I think a short-term immersion somewhere can actually really shake you up. I mean, for me, it was just this realization as I went to church in a village that they might be trying to do church in the local language so that it was meaningful to everyone, but I realized that whenever they came to the Bible, because it hadn't been translated yet, they had to switch to Hausa, and then, you know, some of the men would just keep speaking in Hausa, and gradually all the women and children would sort of drift off. And so being somewhere for a year, going through those cycles of culture stress and learning about yourself a little bit, and learning about the situation, I think that's a really valuable way. You might contribute something useful in that short term, but also it is worth taking, you know, a year to go through that cycle of trying to figure out what does it mean to live in another culture.
David, we've come to the end of our time. Thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Yes. And Ruth, back to you.
Back to you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been amazing to listen to your different stories, particularly the one with regards to the prodigal son. That was really great. But also, David, we'll have a chat later about the best Christian ceilidh bands and see if they match. But I just really wanted to say thank you to our two lovely guests. That is all we had time for this evening, and thank you to everyone who's came this evening and also for the last two Discover Online webinars. If you'd like to be part of the work of Bible translation, there are two ways that we'd like to focus on tonight for you to do that. The first is to pray, and the second is to go. So if you'd like to pray for more people to know God and be transformed by the Bible and the language that they understand best, then there are links in the description below so that you can sign up for our magazine, Words for Life, which comes out quarterly and has great up-to-date stories of God at work and also a daily prayer diary. And there's also a link so that you can become a prayer volunteer and keep up to date with our prayer news, and then share that with your church, your friends and your family so that even more people are praying for the work of Bible translation. We'd also need people to go and to serve overseas in a variety of roles. We need people like David with language-related skills such as linguistics and translation, but we also really need people like Ian with expertise in management, accounting, logistics, software development, and so much more. So do get in touch with us if you think that that might be for you. There's an email address below, initialinterest@wycliffe.org.uk, and we'd love to hear from you. If you're a student or a recent graduate aged between 18 and 30 and interested in finding out more about the work of Bible translation and how you can get involved, then we'd love for you to register for our experience online. This is a 2-week interactive webinar with morning and evening sessions, and it runs from the 26th of May to the 5th of June. And to find out more, you just have to register. You click on the link in the description below as well. And that will be an amazing time for you really to get into some of the nitty gritty, ask those questions, share with other people who are having those same conversations. But again, we just want to thank you for joining us this evening. It's been fantastic, and God bless. Good night.